Well, one of the city councilmen today took to the public forum and decried the negativity. I guess, at what point in time does this constant assertion that the media and the chattering classes are wrong and they're misrepresenting and they don't understand are going to be met with actual responses and explanations that point out how they're wrong and don't understand?
Fiscal caution at this time in Woonsocket is critical to survival. Last time I checked, when I went to get my prescription filled for my glasses, I did not order rose-colored ones. So I look through clear lenses that give me clear answers when I look at data. And I know that makes me something of a nerd, but that's too bad. Somebody has to do that job.
Right.
Somebody has to point out the facts so that we're not all just standing around singing Kumbaya, wondering why things are so terrible because somebody said you're not doing it right. No, that's a shoot the messenger attitude when somebody is bringing facts to the table and asking and wondering why things are being done improperly. But some people like to shoot the messenger because they don't go along with their friends.
There you go. Hey, we are the Coalition Loud and Proud Civilly Disobedient Media. We are here at Harris Hall in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. City Council chambers after the last council meeting for this session of the Woonsocket City Council. Interesting and different from every other city I know in Rhode Island, Woonsocket actually will be inaugurating its new city council and mayor tomorrow here at City Council. So we do not wait for the year end. Folks dive right back in, and it's quite the hornet's nest. Of course, I'm here with John Ward, the soon-to-be former City Council chair for Woonsocket. Did not prevail in an election against, if you will, interim mayor Chris Beauchamp, who will assume the titular role, if you will, of the head of the Woonsocket family tomorrow. Will play in its entirety your closing remarks because they were provocative, focusing largely on facts, but that's kind of how you've always done it. Damn you, those facts. But what I want to talk to you about for just a couple of minutes, you've spent a lifetime in city government during some of the most difficult eras that the city of Woonsocket has ever faced. It wasn't that long ago in American history that Woonsocket was a prosperous mill town. And financially, it's faced a number of challenges over the last really 15 to 20 years. You know, I'm not interested in talking about the crime family that ran this town for a number of years. More spiritually, where you are at. What were your biggest joys, if you will, in serving Woonsocket?
Honestly, one of my biggest joys in serving in the city of Woonsocket was my 10 years that I spent on the school committee. Not every one of them, but a lot of them, because it involved educating children. It involved a level of participation that was greater than you get serving on a city council. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I enjoyed working with the administration as the chairman for several years. I enjoyed the contract negotiations that I thought were beneficial to all and meaningful and were something where we could all live with the outcomes. So I actually found that more enjoyable than my time on the city council. My time on the city council became a challenge because it seemed from the moment I got here in 2006, the economy was running along at a rapid pace, but then sort of collapsed when 2008, 9, and 10 came.
Right.
And unfortunately, the state decided that in balancing their budget and declaring themselves prudent caretakers of the state's finances, they buried local communities under cuts in state aid that were essential to operation, and Woonsocket was particularly hard hit. Over the course of a couple of years, 3 years, we lost $11 million of state aid. The education funding collapsed. They were already desperately out of money. The city literally came together for a meeting in May of 2011 on a Sunday in order to vote on a resolution to request a budget commission, and that was done, speaking of interesting concepts in governance, It was done because the city's checkbook was empty. We were about to bounce checks in the payroll system, and we would not have money to pay our bond payment that was due in July. So in order to help us, as they call it, out of the mess that they created, the state offered to allow us to take in 100% of our education aid for the year into our checkbooks in order to pay bills and catch up. And in doing so, it required that we request the Budget Commission. And so we did. As painful as it was, we turned over authority on the city over to the state and the Budget Commission, and it was in place for 5 years. I got thrown out of my job as a council member as a result of it after the first 2. And then I came back in 2018, and then only to be confronted with the corrupt Baldelli Hunt administration and all of the shenanigans she was playing over the years, and had to constantly go after and try to monitor and manage some of the things she was doing that were completely inappropriate, wasteful, and in her best interest, not the city's best interest. And that became a battle that was never fun, right up until the very end when she had to resign from office, and then subsequently in disagreements with the current mayor over the removal of personnel who were involved in that process, and ultimately were forced into resigning as a result of it. That was not a pleasant process. So my last few years have been difficult, but I was certainly willing to accept the challenge, just as I had always promised when I retired from my full-time job that I would run for mayor. And I retired from my full-time job and I ran for mayor. And 405 people thought he was the better candidate, and so they will have to deal with him managing the $160 million budget for the city of Woonsocket, up against the challenges that I discussed at the end of the meeting tonight, among others.
Right. I brought up the Crowley Act and the potential threat, if you will, that exists largely for every community in the state, because I'm not aware of any communities that, in the eyes of that ruling, would be considered properly funding their school districts, except maybe a handful of the, as we say, the bougie ones.
Oh yeah, there are several that properly fund their school district. I mean, when I was in Lincoln, there was
Right.
more than adequate funding.
Lincoln, Barrington, EG.
In Lincoln, the teacher union that represents the Lincoln teachers is the same one that represents the Woonsocket teachers. And 4 years ago, when I was working for the town of Lincoln, I decided to do a survey of the state. And teacher pay in Lincoln was the second highest in the state. Teacher pay in Woonsocket was the lowest.
Right.
And yet they were represented by the same union. And part of that has to do with resource. The town was very generous with the school department and continued to be generous, and they were able to negotiate contracts that had people well compensated. And so obviously it would be in the interest of teachers in Woonsocket, if they wanted to make more money, to apply for openings in Lincoln and get out of here, which made it very difficult to recruit and retain teachers because the compensation level was so low. On top of that, the city was level funding for years and years and years and years, and it was only when the Budget Commission came in that they got an increase of about it was a couple $1 million over this short period of time. But other than that, they've been level funded every year, save one, when I fought with some other council members to try to get them more money. I've always been of the opinion that they should be increasing the local appropriation at least at the same percentage level as the state raises the state aid, so that you could never have the state coming after you with the excuse that you're not contributing enough. My fear now is with what I've seen done with Providence, where they're demanding that the city pony up millions and millions of dollars of additional local aid, which becomes part of the maintenance of effort, that it will challenge the city's budget. And I think that is a communication to the rest of the state, and especially places like Woonsocket, that you're on our radar. Watch out, we're going to be coming for you. And that's how I think they see us. What they fail to recognize is some of the inherent weaknesses and flaws that distort the amount of need Woonsocket has to the advantage of the suburban communities against the urban communities like Pawtucket, Providence, Woonsocket, Newport, that desperately need aid because of other lost revenues to taxes that we don't collect because of state law and federal law that the state isn't willing to accommodate us for. So their failure contributes to our failure if it's really failure.
Right.
And I see them coming after us next.
Right. I mean, and that's in a financial sense, not even on the quote unquote radar. It's not, as the types would say, it's not baked into the cake yet. That's the looming threat that I get the sense after talking to folks in the incoming government and the mayor that I don't know if they're really cognizant of.
No, they don't have a clue. Most
And
of them don't even know what I'm talking about when I talk about school finance and the formula.
right.
And they gloss over, and it's like the geek is talking again, so phase out. Pretty much the same way the General Assembly treats facts. They have a preconceived notion of what they should do, and they do it. And when you bring them information and data, they get somebody on the sidelines that's lobbying for someone that's opposed to you to come in there and tell them that this kid's all wet, pay no attention to him. And so they do what they do, and they really don't understand the harm they cause.
No. And now take that and look at the other issues. I cue the theme from Jaws, if you will. You've got this whack-a-mole that's been existing since the day Baldelli Hunt left office, which is the constant discovery of new financial atrocities, tax treaties, $100,000 here, $100,000 a year. What do they say? After a while, it can add up.
Yes, I think it was billions back then, but yeah, it's, for instance, we have $2.3 million of ARPA interest that could be used at our discretion with no restrictions, no requirements. It's simply city money. And unfortunately for the city of Woonsocket, because of the corrupt practices of the former mayor related to tax assessments back in 2017 and 18, we're going to be settling court cases that are going to cost us all or possibly more than that 2.3 million, which means all of that money will have gone to waste that could have been used if we'd have done the job right, or if she had done the job right, that could have been used to set aside $2.3 million for future capital projects, $2.3 million for all kinds of other possibilities that we can't consider now, or the next council can't consider now, because that money is pretty much going to be tied up with court settlements.
Right. And for the towns that handled it properly, or somewhat properly, let's be honest here, it was literally a generational opportunity to get things right, bring different schools up to code, and just invest in infrastructure and just bring their communities to a point where there was a steady state, where they were current technology, so many different ways that they could have spent that money.
It was a catch-up opportunity for many communities, because oftentimes with the economy being as troublesome as it was back in 2010 to 13, 14, a lot of capital improvements went by the wayside. A lot of spending that could have been done to upgrade equipment and facilities didn't happen. And this, though it was extremely unfortunate that the pandemic happened, the outcome of the federal government simply printing money,
which we're paying for, by the way, right now with inflation.
which we will.
Yeah.
But the point is that it provided an opportunity to catch up with many of the things that were not getting done. For instance, a lot of street paving, and the Public Works Department now has a lot of new equipment that will last many, many years into the future. Those are some of the capital things that can be done, and building improvements, except for the fact that our budget is now over appropriated beyond the funds we have available, which it should not have been, and I warned them that they were about to do it. I voted no on the things that put us over the top, but they didn't care, because it's just Ward spitting out numbers again, and they didn't really much care about what I said, and they were just going to plow ahead and figure out how to deal with it tomorrow, which I think they call that kicking the can down the road.
Well, remember, tomorrow is only a day away. So here we are. That day has come. Where do you now? You alluded to this, and again, folks, we're going to play the entirety of Council President Ward's closing remarks as they were. There's potential for $1 million in shortfalls between committed ARPA funds and the actual Well, available ARPA funds. Where do you get $1 million from? I mean, this reminds me of the press conference we had with Mayor Brett Smiley of Providence, who has done yeoman's work to right the ship, if you will, bring it into conformity. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a bolt from the blue, it says, hey, by the way, we need another 10 mil. Where does a city like Woonsocket get $1 million, or which ones do they cut?
Well, as it is, the resource that would have been available for a public safety complex have gone away for the most part. I don't know. Our basic operating budget for next year is structurally in a deficit of $1.4 million because this year's budget used $1.4 million of ARPA funds to balance it. That's gone for next year's budget when they prepare it.
Wow.
So they have to start 1.4 million short. Now, the money has to be spent for ARPA projects by the end of next year. So sometime during that fiscal year, they're trying to balance with a shortfall of $1.4 million. The projects have to end, the bills have to be paid, and if they're $1 million over spent, it has to come out of the operating budget for that year, which is already $1.4 million short, or it's going to be a part of a tax increase that then has to be accounted for some way. And I think it'll be very similar to the problem Mayor Smiley's up against, which is unforeseen surprises in the middle of a fiscal year that we are accountable for. Not the least of which becomes the issue of the school department having to deal with over $500,000 of additional tuition paid potentially to a charter school as tuition, with a school department that will be panicked and struggling to balance their books while keeping the staff on that's necessary to deal with the underserved population they attempt to serve that is much more challenging than the charter schools population.
Right.
And it could be the perfect storm. And that's why I'm not suggesting it will happen, but there is a risk of tripping back into a budget commission.
Right, and you're looking at a school department that, as was testified tonight, and reminded, if you will, it's been public knowledge, that cut dozens of positions last year with, again, the Damocles sword of state mandates hanging over your head for everything from special education to facilities.
Well, yes, and the fact is the cuts they made were principally in the areas of social work, teacher aides. Class sizes are maxed out compared to suburban districts. Our class sizes may be the same, but with all the special needs students, they should actually have a lower student-teacher ratio than the suburban districts, but they don't because they can't, because they don't have enough money to pay for more people. So they are challenged in ways that that they could only fill or find solutions for temporarily with the ESSER funds.
Right.
And when the ESSER funds dried up, they had to cut all those positions out that were for social workers, teacher aides, and trying to accommodate the needs of the kids with the kind of support they can get through family intervention and more counseling in school and more attention to their needs.
Which brings us full circle to the fact that that will provide additional fodder for the state to say that you're underfunding your schools.
Yes, but only because we have consistently not increased appropriations, even to the small extent of increasing it to match the state increase year over year, which should be a practice of any district to at least do that if they are in a situation where they need to make choices. One of those choices should be the students in the school system and taking care of their needs, because the costs of operating a school don't freeze for 10 years. And state aid is not enough to compensate for it. So somebody has to recognize that and do the right thing. And it's up to a city administration or a city council to do it.
Right. And the irony, of course, with Providence is that the Rhode Island Department of Education, in their litigation, pointed out that the city of Providence had only raised their funding by $5 million that year, which was a record amount for the city of Providence and represented a commitment in excess of virtually every other community, or I should say urban core community in the state. So, troubled waters.
Yes, they are troubled waters, and the new administration will have huge challenges and operational deficiencies that need to be corrected, but first he has to come to understand what they are. And what I have tried to point out through my effort was to make sure people understood that these deficiencies exist. And I've continuously pointed them out, and I pointed them out again tonight in my closing as a cautionary statement to the residents, the new council, and the administration. The question is, will this new administration even begin to grasp, even to a small extent, the severe extent of the deficiencies in the operations of City Hall? Yeah. But I tried my best. I've been doing this, actually I did it before 1995 because I served on some committees for the school committee. I ran for the Constitutional Convention the last time the state had the brains to actually have one. As a matter of fact, I was one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the state education department for the city of Woonsocket in the lawsuit that we won but then lost for state funding back in 93, 92. I was a plaintiff. I was a plaintiff for the new lawsuit that was just 7, 8, 10 years ago. I have always actively tried to pursue justice for students, and not just for, as the mayor represented in his speech to Rhode during the testimony, that he basically made it clear he was there to represent the 500 Woonsocket students at the mayoral academy and pretty much ignore the 5,500 that he is also the mayor for, that did not seem to merit his communicating with the school department back in July when they signed this application that would cost the education department over $500,000.
$500,000 that
so
they
much
do
for
not have.
transparency.
Right, $500,000 that they simply don't have.
They don't have. No, they're going to cut staff, the essential staff. They're going to cut staff beyond what they cut when the loss of ESSER funds put them in a jam, and now it's going to be beyond a jam. It's going to be worse unless the city budget, with its $1.4 million structural deficit, can find a way to come up with another $600,000 for the school department. I look forward to seeing that proposal come before a city council. And I don't mean to sound sarcastic or derogatory about this, but these are simply facts that need to be considered and addressed by the upcoming administration and city council. And I wasn't hired for the job, so as Freddie Prinz used to say back with Chico and the Man, it's not my job.
Well, one of the city councilmen today took to the public forum and decried the negativity. I guess, at what point in time does this constant assertion that the media and the chattering classes are wrong and they're misrepresenting and they don't understand are going to be met with actual responses and explanations that point out how they're wrong and don't understand?
Fiscal caution at this time in Woonsocket is critical to survival. Last time I checked, when I went to get my prescription filled for my glasses, I did not order rose-colored ones. So I look through clear lenses that give me clear answers when I look at data. And I know that makes me something of a nerd, but that's too bad. Somebody has to do that job.
Right.
Somebody has to point out the facts so that we're not all just standing around singing Kumbaya, wondering why things are so terrible because somebody said you're not doing it right. No, that's a shoot the messenger attitude when somebody is bringing facts to the table and asking and wondering why things are being done improperly. But some people like to shoot the messenger because they don't go along with their friends.
There you go. It's been often asked, but in about 20 hours or so, you're done.
Yeah.
What's your plans?
Well, I'm retired. I just spent 4 days driving cross country with my son from his assignment in California in the Central Valley back to Virginia Beach with his belongings in the truck while I drove the car behind him. And we put in another 3,000 miles, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I was able to spend Thanksgiving with my entire family down in Virginia. My plans at this point are to make a plan. I haven't really thought about it. My expectations were to be coming home to a job to go to. I don't have that job. There are things that interest me. But I think first and foremost, I'm going to follow up with the things that I've asked for through public record requests. I will be extremely aggressive in getting responses. I will become a Pat Ford, what's that young fella's name down in Warwick?
Rob Cody.
Rob Cody, the Rob Cody of Woonsocket. I'm going to watch carefully. I pay a tax bill. I expect to be treated with respect as a taxpayer. I will treat with all due respect, and that's an important term in there, due respect. Some people are due respect, some people are not due respect. I will watch, I will ask questions, I will challenge assumptions, I will look for the audit report to come out, I'll look for finally getting an answer from the auditor, which I think I'm entitled to, as that I asked for it as a council president and got no response. I have informed the auditor of some of the discrepancies or indiscretions I read into some of the activity in the accounts. And I've asked them to look into those things as it relates to the preparation of the audit report for fiscal year 23 and 24. And again, it's one of those things where the legitimate questions and legitimate concerns over finances that should be addressed. And I'm sure somebody in City Hall will say, damn Ward, why is he always causing trouble? But he's not. He's doing his job as a public servant to call attention to things that are being done wrong, and they need to be corrected. And one way to get them corrected is through the audit process.
Folks often forget that, particularly someone like yourself who spent a lifetime in public service, is a member of this community, is a taxpayer,
Yes.
has a lifetime both financial, emotional, and spiritual stake in the fortunes, if you will, both on a grander scale and on an economic scale of the city of Woonsocket. You haven't forgotten that, have you?
No, and the only thing that's going to be different about my life for certain is that I will never be running for elective office again. At this point, I am not really interested in an appointment to something to fill my time. I'm going to fill my time. I'm going to talk with my kids, talk with my wife. We're going to make some plans. We're going to do some things, and they're going to be enjoyable and relaxing. And at the same time, I will be paying close attention to what goes on in City Hall, as close as I can. And I have friends who are on the council, and Jim Canoyer and Dan Gendron, Denise Sierra, and Mike Dubois, who I will ask questions of and possibly provide them some context to my questions so that they can pursue the answers themselves. Because I think if I bring it to them, I would hope that they'll think it's appropriate to do, and they'll follow through.
Well, the battle begins anew. John Ward.
As we say in Woonsocket, same thing except different.
John Ward, lifetime public servant, educator, analyst, leader par excellence. Congratulations. It's almost cliche to say this, but congratulations on a lifetime of service. Despite the outcome, well served. And I think a lot of folks are going to take heart to say and to realize fully you aren't going away. And I think you can tell from different examples that sometimes being a step removed from government allows you an engagement, and I'll use the word ferocity, that might not be part of being on the team.
Let me conclude with this. I stepped down as chairman of the school committee at one point because of significant philosophical differences with the membership that had been elected in 2003, a year which I had run only because there were no other incumbents running, and I wanted to be there with the new members, and they turned into a disaster. And I stepped down as chairman so they could try to run the show for themselves. I found that it was refreshing to be the person that was uninhibited by the restrictions of chairing a meeting and be able to just, as they say, lob the bombs in from the sidelines, not in a negative way, but to ask the questions that you don't ask as chairman. I find the same thing happened to me when I was not council president. I could address issues differently, and I think as going back to just being a resident citizen taxpayer, I will be able to ask much more uncomfortable questions for an administration.
Right.
and be a little more pointed and be a little more demanding because of my rights under the law to get public records, which I know how simple it is sometimes to get them. So I also know how they're produced and will demand them. And so, not to be a bad person about it, but I think I have a right to get information if I think something's being done wrong. And so I will. And I'll enjoy it. I won't do anything I won't enjoy. I guess for the city and for everybody involved in living here and surviving here and dealing with what we deal with, to again use a Star Trek quote, live long and prosper.
God bless, lad. Peace.
Peace.